The clinking of silverware and the warm scent of rosemary turkey filled the air, but all I could feel was the icy distance between me and the people I once called family. It was Thanksgiving, a time for gratitude, connection, and belonging, at least for most families. But as I stood by the kitchen doorway, still holding the pumpkin pie I had baked that morning, I overheard my former sister-in-law whisper just loud enough for the room to catch it. "The kids can sit with the nanny. That's more her level anyway." The words hit me like a slap I wasn't expecting, even though I should have been used to them by now. My name is Tessa Moore. I'm 34, a single mom, and yes, at least on paper, I was a nanny. At least that's what they chose to see. The table was long and lavish, decorated in autumn leaves and gold-trimmed china. My late husband's family always did holidays like they were trying to impress a magazine. Everyone had a seat: lawyers, surgeons, venture capitalists, except me. I wasn't assigned a place at the table, just a role in the background. Again. "Would you mind watching the kids in the den? They get fussy around adults," my mother-in-law said sweetly, but her eyes never softened, not even for a second. I nodded, smiling politely, though my chest burned. I had driven 2 hours that morning to be there. Not for the food, and definitely not for the company. I did it for my son Luca, 6 years old, full of questions and endless optimism. He loved Thanksgiving with the Delaney's. He still believed they cared about him, and maybe they did, in their own rigid, status-obsessed way. I led the kids, my son and his cousins, to the den, set up a board game, and sat on the floor with them. Laughter spilled out of the room, pure and unfiltered. They didn't know the politics of the dining room. They didn't see the glances, hear the remarks, or sense the hierarchy. And honestly, I envied that innocence. I used to believe that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed kind, they'd come around. That maybe grief had made them cold when my husband died in that accident. But years had passed, and I had stopped waiting for warmth. As I helped Luca pick up the game pieces, I heard the toast from the dining room. "To family," someone said, and everyone clinked their glasses. I stayed silent, sipping water from a plastic cup. I didn't want their pity. I didn't even want their respect anymore. But something about the way they dismissed me, like I was invisible, a footnote in their curated lives, lit a fire in me. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet, steady determination. Because what they didn't know was that the nanny they kept pushing to the side had built something they would never see coming. And it was already too late for them to stop it. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever been underestimated, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them. Your voice matters here. They always saw me as just the nanny, not Tessa, the woman who had held this family together after my husband died. Not Tessa, the one who stayed up all night helping his grieving parents sort through old photos. Not even Tessa, the mother of their grandson. Just the woman who took care of children, a paid role, an accessory to their real family unit. But here's the truth they never knew, because they never cared enough to ask. After my husband, James, passed in a car accident 5 years ago, I didn't fall apart. At least, not on the outside. But every night, after Luca was asleep, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder what future we even had. I didn't come from wealth. I didn't have an Ivy League degree. I had paused my own college education when I married James and moved to a new state, hoping love would be enough. When he died, the world didn't pause for me. The mortgage still showed up, groceries still had to be bought, and Luca still needed a mother who could smile through the pain. So I became a nanny. At first, it was just to survive. I took care of other people's children during the day, and my own at night. But I began to notice patterns. What worked, what didn't. The most advanced toys were flashy, but kids got bored quickly. Traditional learning apps didn't adjust to the unique pace of each child. There was a disconnect. I remember one particular afternoon. A 5-year-old boy I looked after was struggling to learn the alphabet. I tried singing it, building it out of Play-Doh, and then finally wrote a little program on my old laptop, a visual, interactive AI tool that responded to how he played. And it clicked. The sparkle in his eyes when he spelled dog on his own, I'll never forget it. That night, something shifted in me. What if I wasn't just surviving? What if I could build something? I started small, teaching myself code again after Luca went to bed, reading about cognitive development, behavioral science, and machine learning. I applied for grants in secret, pitched my ideas to angel investors over Zoom calls from my laundry room. My company back then was just me, my laptop, and a whiteboard in my hallway. I named it Learn Bloom because I believed children could flourish if we met them where they were, not where the system assumed they should be. The first breakthrough came when a local school district agreed to pilot my AI platform in their kindergarten classes. A month later, their reading levels jumped by 22%. I was suddenly getting calls from parents, from educators, and finally from investors. But I never told the Delaney's. Not because I was hiding, but because they never asked. To them, I was the girl who once married into their family above her station, then slipped back into irrelevance after their golden boy died. What they didn't realize was that while they were busy trading wine recommendations and talking about stock portfolios, I was quietly securing funding rounds and negotiating patents. They lived in a private, upscale neighborhood called Maplewood Grove, proud of their exclusivity and prestige. Ironically, it was the perfect location for Learn Bloom's new innovation hub, a center where children, especially those from underfunded districts, could access world-class educational tools, completely free. The land was ideal. The community board had already been considering a sale of the adjacent lots to offset maintenance costs. My team, using a holding company, closed the deal in under a week, discreetly, efficiently. They had no idea I was behind it. Not yet. The Thanksgiving dinner from earlier still lingered in my mind. The way they had dismissed me again. It used to make me cry. Now, it just made me curious. How much longer could they keep pretending the world hadn't changed around them? They thought I was the nanny in the corner. They didn't know that I was the one signing the papers that would change their entire block. They didn't know, but they were about to find out. The invitation came in a white envelope, hand-delivered to every household in Maplewood Grove. No logos, no flashy designs, just clean, embossed lettering and an elegant gold seal at the flap. You are cordially invited to the Maplewood Grove Community Update meeting hosted by New Horizons Development Group. This Thursday at 6:00 p.m. Location, Community Clubhouse Ballroom. It looked like every other neighborhood update notice. Boring, easily discarded. But this one was different. I knew it because I signed off on it. The development group? That was my holding company. New Horizons was the public-facing arm we used for all acquisition projects to protect Learn Bloom's brand from speculation during expansion. The truth was, this wasn't just a real estate deal. It was the heart of our next big phase. I hadn't intended to be the one who walked into that ballroom that night. Originally, I was going to let my VP of operations handle it. Keep things clean, professional, and distant. But after Thanksgiving, after being told to sit with the kids, something shifted in me. Not from anger, from clarity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. So when Thursday came, I didn't wear power heels or a sharp blazer. I wore a navy blue blouse, simple black pants, and flats. Comfortable, calm, familiar. But I walked in with my back straight, holding a folder under one arm, and watched as the room shifted around me. There they were, the Delaney's. My mother-in-law seated front and center, hair styled in a stiff bun like always, pearl necklace catching the warm light from the chandelier. My sister-in-law scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice me. Uncle Richard chatting loudly with the local realtor, completely unaware that the woman walking in behind them was the reason they'd all been summoned. I took my seat at the head of the long table. No nameplate, no introductions yet. Let them wonder. The meeting started with a few standard updates from the HOA. Landscaping changes, updated recycling schedules, blah, blah, blah. I let it all wash over me. I could see a few people glancing my way, clearly unsure what role I played. Then the HOA president stood up and cleared her throat. "Now for the main item on the agenda," she said. We're excited to introduce a special guest tonight who represents the new ownership group of the Eastern Lots, including the old playground site and the adjacent parcel, formerly zoned for private residential expansion. She turned to me, smiling. Everyone, please welcome the founder and CEO of New Horizons Development. A pause. You could hear a pin drop. Ms. Tessa Moore, my name. My full name. The room froze. Eyes snapped toward me. My sister-in-law's jaw went slack. My mother-in-law blinked. Once, twice, as if trying to process the words. I could almost hear her brain firing questions. Did she just say Tessa? Our Tessa? I stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. Thank you, I began calmly. I know many of you recognize me as a longtime resident of this community, but I'm here tonight in a different capacity, as the founder of Learn Bloom and the executive leading the development of our new innovation hub right here in Maplewood Grove. A soft murmur spread across the room. I know some of you may be concerned about traffic, noise, and what this means for property values, I continued, flipping open the folder I brought. So let me reassure you, our design will preserve the charm of this neighborhood while bringing state-of-the-art educational resources to children across the region, many of whom could never dream of accessing what you already have. A hand shot up. It was my mother-in-law. Wait, she said. You own this project? You're the one building that school? I met her gaze and smiled. Yes, I am. She didn't speak after that. Neither did my sister-in-law. Uncle Richard suddenly found the wood grain of the table very interesting. I kept my speech brief, respectful, clear. Not once did I mention how they treated me. Not once did I say, I told you so. I didn't need to. They were already sitting in it. When the meeting adjourned, the room emptied slowly, like air leaking from a balloon that had been too full for too long. I stayed behind to speak with a few board members and local residents who were curious about Learn Bloom. Questions poured in, not about property lines, but about curriculum models, scholarship access, and how their grandkids might apply. They didn't care that I used to be just a nanny. They saw something else now. But the Delaney's? They didn't speak to me. Not that night. They walked past me in silence, the same way people walk past a casket they weren't ready to grieve. And I didn't chase them. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text. Mom Delaney, we'd like to speak with you. Today, if possible. At the house. I stared at it for a long moment before replying, me. 3 p.m. works. When I arrived at their home, everything looked the same. Immaculate hedges, the brass door knocker polished like always, and the same faint scent of cinnamon sticks floating from the entryway. But something felt different. They led me to the living room where I'd once been told, shortly after James's funeral, that it might be best for Luca to stay with them full-time, since, after all, I had no career, and couldn't offer him the life James would have wanted. That was the last time I cried in their house. Today I sat upright and calm, hands folded in my lap, and let the silence work against them for once. Why didn't you ever tell us? My sister-in-law finally blurted out. There it was. Not congratulations. Not we're proud of you. Just confusion wrapped in accusation. Because you never asked, I replied softly. And when you did speak to me, it wasn't with curiosity. It was with condescension. You were always so quiet about everything, she muttered. Quiet doesn't mean empty, I said. It means I was building something while you were dismissing me. My mother-in-law took a sip of her tea, her hand trembling just slightly. Why that location? Why this neighborhood? She asked. I paused, not to dramatize, but to weigh my words carefully. Because I wanted children, any children, regardless of where they come from, to have access to the kind of tailored, compassionate learning Luca deserved after James died. And this neighborhood? It was available. It was right. The decision was business, not personal. But of course, it was also personal. She looked away, lips pursed tightly. I recognized it. Not guilt exactly, but the moment before guilt arrives. We didn't know, she said. No, I nodded. You didn't. And that's the part I want you to think about. They expected an apology, or at least a confession of insecurity, something that would let them believe I still needed their approval. Instead, I stood up. I don't need anything from you. I just wanted you to know who I am. So next time, maybe don't decide someone's worth based on their title at your Thanksgiving table. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, she spoke again. Tessa, my mother-in-law said quietly. Luca, does he know what you've built? I paused at that. Yes, I said, turning slightly. He knows I build things that help other kids, but he doesn't know what you said to me last week. I didn't want him to think less of his family. For once, my voice shook, not from fear, but from truth. And you're lucky I want to protect that. That evening, Luca and I sat on the couch, him curled up next to me, humming as he built towers out of magnetic blocks. Mom, he said suddenly, do you like Thanksgiving? I smiled faintly. I think I'm learning to. Will we go back next year? I didn't answer right away. Maybe, I said, but only if they remember your mom's not just the nanny anymore. He giggled. You're the boss. I kissed the top of his head. Something like that. The following week, something unusual happened. I picked Luca up from school like always, expecting his usual burst of energy and excited retelling of his day. But as soon as he got in the car, he was quiet. Not sad, just thoughtful, like his little brain was carrying something heavy. What's on your mind, bud? I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He looked at me, then out the window. Mom, do we still like Grandma? I almost missed the stop sign. My fingers tightened on the wheel for a beat before I answered. Why do you ask that? She came to school today. That made me slow down. She what? He nodded. She brought cookies for the class, but then she pulled me aside and said she wanted to see how I was doing and that she missed me. A strange swirl of emotions ran through me. Guilt, caution, a flicker of hope, and then the instinct to protect. She hasn't done that before, right? I asked. No, Luca said. She never comes to school. I thought maybe you told her to? I didn't, I said honestly. He nodded, still watching the world pass through his window. She said you're doing really big things, like you're important now. That landed like a brick in my chest. Now, as if I hadn't been important every single day, I kept our little world afloat. As if value could be measured only after headlines and contracts and neighborhood meetings. Luca turned back to me, his voice soft. Are you mad at her? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I parked in front of our house and turned to face him fully. I'm not mad, I said. But sometimes, people take a long time to see someone for who they really are. He blinked, thoughtful again. Like superheroes? I smiled. Exactly like superheroes. That night, I received an email with the subject line, Request for meeting, personal and private. It was from Uncle Richard. I hesitated. He'd been silent for years, unless he was bragging about his golf scores or sharing an article about his latest investment property. But now, he wanted to talk. I agreed, at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. He was already seated when I arrived, tapping his phone, eyes darting up as I walked in. I noticed how his face shifted when he saw me, not in mockery like before, but measured, unsure. He stood, offered a stiff smile. Tessa, he said. Thanks for coming. I sat. What's this about? He folded his hands, suddenly serious. I owe you an apology. A few, actually. I didn't say anything, just waited. I judged you. We all did. We thought you were playing house, holding on to James, wasting your potential. But now, look, I don't even know half of what you've built, but it's impressive. You turned an impossible situation into a company that's going to change lives. That's not luck. That's vision. I blinked. That was more than I'd expected. But, he added, I also think this family has done real damage. And I wanted you to hear from someone that we were wrong. There it was. Not redemption, maybe, but accountability. You weren't just wrong, I said carefully. You were cruel. You used to call me sweet but directionless. You voted against me when I tried to keep Luca in the same school after James died. You didn't just doubt me. You tried to erase me. He nodded. I did. And I hate that I did. A pause. Then he added, I think they're scared now. Not because you've changed, but because they know you didn't have to. You could have stayed small. You didn't. I took a breath. What do you want from me, Richard? He looked me in the eye. Nothing, except maybe a chance to help, if there's ever room for it. That surprised me, but I didn't reject it outright. I'll think about it, I said. He smiled faintly. That's more than fair. Later that night, Luca came into my room holding a sheet of paper. What's that? I asked. My class had to draw superheroes today, he beamed. This is mine. I looked at it. A figure with glasses and a laptop, standing on top of a school building, cape flowing, arms outstretched. She had a little boy next to her holding her hand. That's you, he said proudly. You're my superhero. I couldn't speak for a full minute. He didn't know about contracts, about people finally realizing what I was worth, about apologies over coffee or grandmothers bringing cookies to fix old wounds. But he knew what mattered, and maybe that was enough. The first snowfall of December had just dusted the sidewalks when the letter arrived. Not an email, not a message. An actual handwritten letter, on heavy paper with a pressed watermark. The kind people don't send anymore unless it's either an apology or something that changes your life. It was from James's former mentor, Professor Harold Sutton. I hadn't seen or heard from him since James's funeral. Back then, he'd offered kind words in a tight handshake, told me to keep going, and that James spoke of you constantly, especially your mind. Then he vanished back into academia, swallowed by tenure reviews and national education boards. But now, here his words were again. Dear Tessa, I've been watching LearnBloom's growth from afar. I didn't realize it was you behind it, until your name came up at the Innovation in Learning Symposium last month. You've built something extraordinary, not just for education, but for equity. I'd like to meet. I believe we can help each other on a much larger scale. Warmly, Dr. Harold Sutton. I sat at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Luca was in the living room building what he called a rocket-powered school, using cereal boxes and colored tape. I watched him for a moment, then back at the letter. Help each other? What could I possibly offer someone like Harold Sutton? We met at a small conference center uptown, a place filled with glass, clean lines, and enough silence to hear your own nerves. He looked the same, a little more gray perhaps, and a little slower to stand, but those sharp eyes hadn't lost their spark. Tessa, he said warmly, extending both hands, you look like someone who's finally walking in her own name. I try, I smiled. We sat across from each other, coffee cups steaming, windows framing the icy city below. I won't waste your time, he said. You know what you've built. But what you may not know is that several national districts are watching LearnBloom. Some have tried to replicate your model. None have succeeded. I blinked. That's surprising. We've been fairly quiet about the back end. He smiled. Quiet is smart. It keeps the vultures guessing. Then he slid a folder toward me. Inside was a proposal, a joint venture between LearnBloom and the National Alliance for Child Equity, a chance to scale our platform to 500-plus schools across the country, with funding, government support, and policy-level integration. I don't offer this lightly, he said, but your vision is exactly what we need. Not just software, not just curriculum. You, your story, your clarity. Your refusal to forget who this work is actually for. I stared at the folder, then up at him. This is more than I imagined. He nodded. That's the thing about people who were underestimated. They imagine just enough to survive. But now, it's time to imagine bigger. His words hit something tender in me, something I had buried beneath strategy and cautious progress. Imagine bigger. I thought of Luca, of those sleepless nights coding while folding laundry, of wiping tears off my cheeks quietly while rocking him back to sleep, of Thanksgiving spent being spoken around, not to. I thought of the Delaney's still frozen in their marble kitchens, unaware that a nanny had become a national force. "You'd be in charge," Harold added. "No one's asking you to sell. We're just asking you to lead louder." That night, after Luca fell asleep, I stood by his door and watched him breathe, his chest rising, tiny fingers curled around his blanket. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder. My cursor hovered over the reply box, and I typed, "I'm in. Let's change the future." The next morning, as I walked Luca to school, snow crunching under our boots, he looked up at me and said, "Mom? Yeah? Do you think I could teach someday, like you?" I paused. "You already do, kiddo. You taught me more than anyone else." He grinned and squeezed my hand. The next time I saw the Delaneys, it wasn't over dinner. It wasn't at a holiday gathering or a school play. It was inside the same living room where I had once been asked, ever so politely, not to get in the way of their family's grief. But this time, I was here by invitation. And this time, I wasn't the one holding my breath. "Thank you for coming," my mother-in-law said as she smoothed the creases of her blouse. Her tone was formal, cautious, like someone trying to cross thin ice without breaking it. I took a seat across from her, not on the edge of the couch like I used to. I sat back, comfortable in the silence I no longer felt the need to fill. Beside her sat Uncle Richard, who nodded at me with a little more humility than before. My sister-in-law wasn't present. I didn't ask why. "So," she began, clasping her hands, "we heard from Richard about your expansion and the national contract." I waited. Not smug, just patient. "We're impressed," she continued, "and honestly, a little overwhelmed. What you've done, it's incredible, Tessa." That was the first time she had used my name without some implied disappointment attached to it. "Thank you," I said simply. She nodded, swallowing. "I suppose we didn't really know how to talk to you. After James passed, everything felt fractured. And maybe we took that out on you. Or maybe we just didn't know how to handle a woman who didn't crumble." Now that was honest. "I don't need an apology," I replied. "I've made peace with what happened. But I think it's important we're honest. You didn't just ignore me. You erased me. From conversations, from decisions, from even basic respect. And for a long time, I let it happen, because I thought keeping peace was more important than keeping my voice." She looked away, eyes shining just slightly. "You're right. And now?" I asked. "Why did you ask me here?" Uncle Richard stepped in. "Because we think this family has something to offer, if you're willing." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "There's an old Delaney property upstate," he said. "A historic estate, barely used, sitting on acres of forest and lakefront. We want to offer it to LearnBloom as a partnership. A retreat site for underprivileged children, teacher residencies, family programs, whatever you envision. No strings." I blinked. This wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a gesture, a real one. My mother-in-law spoke again, softer this time. "It's James's birthplace. We always said we wanted it to mean something again. And maybe this is the way it does." My first instinct was hesitation. After all this time, was this a trap? Guilt wrapped in charity? But then I remembered what Professor Sutton said. It's time to imagine bigger. What if I could take the place that raised the man I loved and turn it into a sanctuary for other children, especially the ones who didn't get second chances? And what if healing wasn't always loud or dramatic? What if sometimes it started with a simple word? "Yes." They both looked stunned. "Yes? Yes," I said again. "But under one condition." "What's that?" Richard asked. "That every child who walks through those gates is seen, not by what they lack, but by what they might become. That we teach them how to take up space, even in rooms that weren't built with them in mind." My mother-in-law's voice cracked. "That sounds like something James would have believed in." I smiled, eyes stinging. He did. That weekend, Luca and I drove to the estate. He pressed his face to the car window as the old manor came into view. "Whoa," he whispered. "Is this a castle?" I laughed. "Kind of. It's going to be your second backyard." He turned to me, eyes wide. "We're gonna live here?" "No, baby. But kids like you, from all over, will come here to learn, to explore, to dream. And we're going to build it for them." He leaned back in his seat, proud. "You're doing big things, Mom." I looked at him in the rearview mirror, the boy who had been my reason when the world gave me none. "I'm just getting started." 6 months later, the Delaney estate looked nothing like the haunted monument it once was. The ivy-choked columns had been cleared, replaced with wide ramps and sensory-friendly paths. The grand ballroom, once filled with antique furniture and dusty portraits, had become an open learning space flooded with natural light. Sunlight bounced off modular furniture, smartboards, art tables, and interactive tech stations. We named it the Bloom House. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise. I walked through the halls one morning, watching teams of volunteers prepare for our first week of pilot programs. Children from underserved districts would bus in from across the state, some for the first school trip they'd ever had. We had counselors, educators, artists, and even therapy dogs waiting to greet them. And still, something tugged at me. Not fear, not doubt, just that unshakable sense you get when you're standing in a place where the past hasn't fully let go. That afternoon, while reviewing our updated intake policies in the office upstairs, my assistant appeared in the doorway. "You have a visitor, no appointment, says it's personal." I was about to wave it off when she added, "His name is Daniel Prescott, says he used to work with your husband, says it's about James." Daniel. That name hadn't crossed my mind in years. Back when James was alive, Daniel was his closest colleague at the education nonprofit where they both worked. He was brilliant, a bit reckless, and fiercely idealistic. After James passed, Daniel had disappeared, moved out of state, cut off from everyone. I stood slowly. "Send him in." He looked older now, grayer, leaner, but with the same eyes, the same fire. "Tessa," he said softly. "Daniel," I replied. "It's been a long time." He stepped into the office, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the walls. "So this is you," he said, nodding at the photos, the blueprints, the whiteboard covered in strategy notes. "This is us," I corrected. "The kids, the educators, the people who never had a seat at the table. I just built the table." He gave a short laugh. "James would have loved this. You know that, right?" I nodded, but the lump in my throat made it hard to speak. "I didn't come to rehash the past," he said. "I came because I've been watching from a distance. What you've built, it's not just powerful, it's scalable. I'm running a district pilot program in Chicago, and your name came up in almost every meeting. That caught my attention." "Okay." "I want to bring Bloomhouse there," he said, stepping forward. "Not just the app or the curriculum, the medal, the full model. A second campus, but this time in a place where kids walk to school past broken glass and vacant lots, where hope is a rumor." He laid a folder on my desk. Site plans, district data, letters of support. "I'm not asking for charity," he said. "I'm asking for partnership. You bring the vision. I'll bring the ground team." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scale of it all, from a rented apartment to a neighborhood hub, to now being asked to plant a second tree in someone else's backyard. "I need time," I said honestly. "We just opened here." Daniel nodded. "I figured, but I had to ask, because I know what you're capable of. And more than that, I know what James believed you were capable of, even when you didn't." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he added, "you became more than I ever imagined. And I always imagined a lot." That night, I stood on the back deck of the Bloom House, the lake still and silver beneath the stars. In the distance, wind rustled the trees James used to run through as a child. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle. Daniel's offer was more than expansion. It was legacy. It was a bridge between who I had been and who I still could become. But it also meant risk, more pressure, more scrutiny, more late nights away from Luca. I heard the door open behind me. "Can't sleep?" Luca's little voice asked. I turned and smiled. "Just thinking." He patted over in his fuzzy slippers and looked out over the water. "Is this where you used to be sad?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You said once you used to cry when people didn't believe in you. Is this the house?" I knelt next to him. It was. But now? Now it's the place where I remember who I really am. He nodded and leaned against me. "Then let's build another one. Somewhere else. For the other moms who cry." My heart cracked open in the best way. "Maybe we will," I whispered. Maybe we will. Snow was falling heavier now. Thick, quiet flakes settled on the wide porch of Bloomhouse, softening everything. Rooftops, fences, even memories. Inside, I stood by the tall windows, reviewing a revised expansion budget while Luca worked quietly beside me, coloring rocket ships. He was humming, happy and safe, but my thoughts were anything but still. Daniel's offer had stirred something deep. Not just ambition, but responsibility. I knew what a second Bloomhouse could mean for Chicago's West End. I'd read the statistics, I'd seen the maps, and I knew without question that the children there deserved better. But could I give more without losing pieces of what I'd already built? I looked at Luca. The answer had to start with him. Yeah. Later that week, we held a board meeting with the Learn Bloom advisors, both in person and virtual. The room buzzed with cautious excitement. "This is more than expansion," one advisor said. "It's replication. If Chicago works, then Atlanta, Detroit, St. Louis are next." Another added, "We've got interest from private donors already. Matching funds if we move within the next 60 days. But then my CFO chimed in, measured and firm. "We're forgetting something," she said. "Tessa didn't just build a model, she built a culture. You can copy structures, you can't copy trust. If we move too fast, we risk turning Bloomhouse into just another project instead of the movement it's becoming." That landed heavily. Everyone turned to me. "What's your call, Tessa?" I took a deep breath. "I believe in what we're doing, but we need to be right before we move fast. I won't be the founder who stretches so far she forgets why she started. Let's do Chicago, yes, but not as an empire, as a community, one that grows with roots, not just branches." Some nodded. A few looked disappointed, but I didn't flinch. I had learned the hard way that not all growth is progress. That night, I received a call I never expected. My old boss. Yes, that one. The woman who fired me from my nanny position years ago because I was too ambitious for this line of work. Her words, not mine. She had seen the story about Bloomhouse on a national education podcast, and suddenly she wanted a conversation. "I'm not calling to rekindle anything," she said quickly, "but I have a proposal." I almost laughed. "Go on." "There's a chain of private preschools in the Northeast. They're struggling, and I've been asked to lead a revitalization. I want to partner with Learn Bloom. Bring your software, your philosophy, everything. You'd be compensated fairly, of course." "Why now?" I asked. "Sa niad." A pause. "Because I was wrong," she admitted. "And because you were right. Kids need more than supervision. They need guidance, agency, real support. You saw that before the rest of us did." It was the first time anyone from my old world had said that out loud. But I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I said something that surprised even me. "I'm not interested in proving anything anymore. I'm only interested in purpose." And with that, the conversation ended. On my terms. That weekend, Bloomhouse held its first Family Learning Day. More than 200 children and parents attended. They built solar-powered toys, cooked healthy meals in our learning kitchen, painted murals, and planted winter greens in the heated greenhouse. And near the end of the day, while standing by the community board filled with thank you notes from kids, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. It was my sister-in-law, not in pearls, not in heels, in a hoodie and jeans with no entourage. "I came to help clean up," she said simply. "If that's okay." I didn't speak. I just handed her a broom. And that was how we spent the next hour, side by side in silence, sweeping glitter and crumbs off the gym floor, shoulder to shoulder like sisters who had both been wrong in different ways. That night, after Luca went to bed, I sat in the main office of Bloomhouse alone. I wrote 2 emails. The first, to Daniel. We're ready, one campus at a time, but this time the kids name it. The second, to our donors. Growth is not about more, it's about meaning. And every expansion must be rooted in relationship. Otherwise, it's just real estate. Then I turned off the lights, stepped into the snowy courtyard, and watched the world breathe. I had been the nanny, the widow, the underestimated. Now I was the architect, and I was still building. Spring arrived slowly, as if the world itself had taken a long breath before deciding it was safe to bloom again. At Bloomhouse, daffodils pushed through thawed soil, and children ran across the courtyard, their laughter rising like songbirds. Inside, classrooms buzzed with energy. Curiosity felt tangible, painted in colors, built in blocks, asked through endless whys. And for the first time in years, I felt still. Not because things had stopped moving, but because somehow I had caught up to my own story. The second Bloomhouse opened quietly on a Thursday in Chicago. No press, no ribbon cutting, just a line of children walking through the doors with backpacks too big and eyes too wide. Daniel sent me a photo that morning. A group of kids gathered around a mural that read, "This place was made for you." He wrote beneath it, "They named the reading room after James." I didn't cry right away. I finished making Luca's breakfast. I walked him to school. I answered emails. Then, around 11 a.m., I stepped into my office, closed the door, and let the tears come, soft, full, and without apology. A few weeks later, I stood on stage at the National Child Equity Summit, not to receive an award, but to introduce a panel on compassionate learning models. I spoke briefly, just 10 minutes. But during that time, I told the story I'd spent so long hiding. Not just the growth of LearnBloom or the journey from nanny to founder. I told the story of what it's like to be doubted so deeply you start to believe it yourself. I told them about Thanksgiving, about being called just the nanny, about being invisible in rooms that bore my last name. And then I told them how I built something anyway, not to prove them wrong, but to give children something right. The room was quiet when I stepped off the stage. A few people stood, some clapped. One woman, eyes brimming, mouthed, "Thank you." But that wasn't the legacy. Not really. The legacy came a week later when I visited a local Bloomhouse satellite campus during art hour. A little girl named Evie ran up to me with paint all over her sleeves and said, "You built this?" I smiled. "Yes." She tilted her head. "Why?" I knelt down to her level. "Because when I was your age, there wasn't a place like this for me, and I wanted to make sure there was one for you." She nodded, satisfied. "Okay," she said. "But next time you build something, can it have a slide?" I laughed out loud. "You got it." That evening, Luca and I sat on the porch of the original Bloomhouse. The sky blushed with golden light. He leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "I like it when we just sit." "Me too," I said. He pulled something from his backpack, a homemade medal made of foil and ribbon. "It's for you," he said. "You're the best builder in the world." I held it like it was made of gold. And in that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet knowledge that the world is softer where you once stood firm.